All right, you guys grab a seat. Give it up for our worship team tonight. It's crazy because they're not used to playing in this room. In fact, when they got here, a couple of them were asking me, like, where do I plug in? Like, they're not even sure where anything is. So for them to come up here and to play so excellently tonight up here in this room is pretty great. It's pretty great to do that on the fly. They kind of were prepared that they were going to be in here, but they had not had any practice time in this room beyond a couple hours ago. So for them to come in here and do that is really, really, really great and incredible. So we're going to be in Daniel chapter 2. If you follow along in your Bibles or if you're following along at home, you may have tuned in when Pastor Vince and Scott led us in the first chapter and first part of chapter 2 in Daniel. They opened it up so great, and we're going to kind of finish up chapter 2 tonight. And you may be familiar with this, you may not be familiar. How many of you love Old Testament stuff? Anybody love Old Testament stories? At home, you feel free to comment, let us know what's your favorite Old Testament story. A lot of people love, Daniel in the lion's den, or David and Goliath, or, parting the Red Sea, things like that. This is a good one. This is going to set up a lot of really cool things that happen in the Old Testament, particularly through Daniel. But we'll get to that in just a minute. First of all, I want to tell you a little story. And by the way, if I start scrambling up here, my iPad's been acting up. And so I had to bring some paper product here. I know I'm trying to go green and do the whole iPad thing, but I'm sitting here and I start to, at the last song before I approach the stage, every time I preach anywhere, this is ever since I was a first time preacher, I go, I start scanning notes and stuff as the last song, and I'm just sort of praying through as the lyrics kind of hit me, and I'm just sort of in that moment with my notes, and I would go to pull up my notes and they're not there. And I was like, what in the world? And so my iPad did this weird thing last week where it crashed and I lost everything. And then I got a few things back, but not everything. And then I just pull it up and there's like 60 things that I had missing in my Pages app, and they're all there. And I was like, but not what I was working on, not for this message. That was not there. And I was like, how can everything be back except for this message? So anyway, lucky me, because it's been acting up, always print a copy of everything you do. All right, always back it up. So here we go. That's the moral of the story. But that is not the moral of the message. I want to start out by telling you a little bit of a story about my life. Now, how many of you, and we can't see you on live stream, but perhaps you've played this game called Capture the Flag. Anybody played Capture the Flag in this place? You've probably played it here with us. We've played some pretty massive Capture the Flag games. In fact, there's been some violence happening in some of our Capture the Flag games. And, I remember one Eli Westmoreland. I don't know if he's in the place. I don't see him yet. He must be still at work. But Eli Westmoreland got body slammed by another guy in the middle of a Capture the Flag game. And I was like, whoa, things are getting pretty serious. But it was also kind of awesome, so I let it go. And so my life has been that kind of life where if I'm in a competition mode, I get a little crazy aggressive, okay? I'm your youth pastor, so if me and you have ever played a game, I go pretty, I'm at a level 7 out of 10, all right? But when it's me and people that are my age, it's 11 out of 10, okay? I'm going extremely, extremely aggressive. And it's gotten me in some pretty precarious situations, such as the time I was banned from ever playing Capture the Flag with my friends. So the year was 1995, and we were playing Capture the Flag at a friend's house. Now, we played Capture the Flag with water balloons and water guns and stuff like that, and it was all fun and games, and all really, G-level fun. But then, so there's every Capture the Flag game is a little different. And this particular one, we had a jail. Each team had this, jail situation happening. So if you were hit, if you were sprayed, if you got wet, if the other team got you, you had to drop all your ammunition, all your weapons, everything, and you had to go and you were placed in captivity. They took you to their fort, their base, their headquarters, and you had to stay there until one of your teammates was able to rush in and tag you out. You may be familiar with this rule. Now, this particular day, I was placed in a jail situation. I was in enemy territory. They took me, they brought me, they put me in their little situation. And I was with no ammunition, no gun, no water balloons, no anything. And I just had to sit there. And me, being A, super competitive, and B, not very patient at that point in my life, I'm sitting around and I'm thinking, and this is in the middle of the woods, by the way, I should tell you this. This was in a friend's house who lived on the edge of a wooded area. So we're in the woods playing this. And I had in particular, I don't know if you're familiar with the year 1995. Two big things came out in 1995 or there around 1995. One movie named Die Hard, and one came out a little bit before that named Terminator 2. These were two of my all-time favorite movies. And I had watched a little too much Die Hard and a little too much Terminator in my life. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I am not made for captivity. I was not made to be in enemy territory and not be able to handle myself. Die Hard taught me about this. I need to know. And so I'm sitting there and in this wooded area. So in Alabama, if you're familiar with the woods at all, you know that there's these large acorn-like things called hickory nuts. And you might guess they come off of a hickory tree. And they're big acorn balls, okay? I just happen to be sitting in a pile of them. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, you know, these are good ammunition. And I thought, they've got water guns. I got like rocks. And so I start like putting a bunch of hickory nuts in my pockets. And like I do my shirt like out like this. And I got like a kangaroo pouch of hickory nuts. And I'm just kind of, I'm waiting. And when the time was right, I just went ballistic on the other team with hickory nuts. And I'm just bombarding them. It was like, if you've watched the movie Elf, when Elf has all the snowballs and he's like, and he's just pegging everybody. That's what was happening with these hickory nuts. And I was just like, my friend was like, hey, and he picks up his squirt gun and I'm like, smash with the hickory nut. And he's like, eh. And then I'm just like, I'm beating them to death with these nuts and I'm just running and they're trying to get me to stop. They're like, stop hitting us with those. And I'm like, get out of here. And I'm like, I'm busting out of here. And anyway, that day I was banned from ever playing Capture the Flag with my friends. All that to say, imagine being captive for real in a foreign land. Imagine being captive, held in captivity by a foreign government. They have conquered your land. They've conquered your city. And they've pulled you out and they've put you in captivity where they live. They've pulled you away from everything you know, everything you love, and they've put you in their area in slavery. That's what we're dealing with when we're in Daniel. All right? Daniel and the Jewish people have been conquered by Babylon and they've been pulled out and they have been brought into a captivity under Babylon. And there's a king. Now, in VeggieTales, they shorten the name to King Nezer, but his name is Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar was trying to figure out what to do with these Jewish people, and some of them that he was making to fight for him and his army. And one of these groups had Daniel, and they renamed Daniel Belshazzar, and then they renamed his buddies Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You might know them, and there's a story coming up in just a little bit about them. But here's the deal. They were taken into captivity. They were forced to do whatever Nebuchadnezzar and his regime said they should do. So imagine that. Imagine, just put yourself there in the story of Daniel for just a second. And God allows Daniel to navigate his time in captivity in some really cool ways. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about. Being captive by an enemy force and navigating that with faith. That's one thing Daniel was all about. And Daniel has already gained, by the time we're in chapter 2, the end of chapter 2, we'll start in verse 24 tonight, but by the time we're here, Daniel's already gained a little bit of a reputation for himself and his buddies, really. When Nebuchadnezzar says, well, if you're going to fight for us, you've got to eat a certain way. Here's our nutrition system. And it was totally against the nutrition system that God had given the Jewish people. And Daniel steps forward. He says, oh, king, if you allow us to eat vegetables and water, basically, instead of all the stuff, all the junk that you're feeding your fighting men, we will be bigger, stronger, faster, and better looking than all of your guys. Let me prove it to you. And so he was able to be faithful to his God and make the king happy because they were better fighting men at the end of the day. So Daniel has this little reputation of being faithful to his God, even though he's not where the people of God used to live, used to reside. So he held up God's standard of eating rather than the nutrition suggested by the empire at that time. Fast forward to chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar starts having some weird dreams. Anybody had some weird dreams lately? Yeah. I'm not going to get you to like come up and tell us about them, but weird dreams. Nebuchadnezzar starts to have them. He's laying in bed and he starts like freaking out about the things he's seeing in his mind. His, the mental situation is kind of killing him here. He was having this vivid dream over and over, and he was convinced that God or some deity was trying to speak directly to him through this dream. So that's where we're going to end up picking up. But long story short, Daniel volunteers to interpret the dream. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this. Daniel was risking his life at this moment that we're about to pick up here. There's this guy, Arioch, and he was the commander of the forces. He was the A1 soldier for Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar tries to get all the wisest men, all the magicians, all the people that say they can interpret dreams. He tried to get them to interpret his dream. But here's the trick. They didn't just get to interpret his dream. Like, he was not going to just tell them the dream and they were going to give him some bogus interpretation. They had to, the trick was, and this is Nebuchadnezzar being smart, right? He wanted them to tell him what his dream was and then tell him what the dream was about. All right? So if you're in that situation, you're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, because if you start trying to say, oh, here was your dream, and he says, nope, that was not my dream, your head was gone. At the very least, you were going to be thrown into prison, a deep, dark hole somewhere, maybe with the lions, because he had some. All right, we'll see that later. But here's what happened. None of the wise men would even touch it. They couldn't do it. So Nebuchadnezzar said, Arioch, I want you to go kill all of the wise men, all of the so-called prophets, all of the magicians, all the people that say they have this gift of interpretation. I want you to just go kill them all, because none of them can help me with my dream. Now, that's a pretty mean thing. So Daniel was risking his life because he approached Arioch. Now, Daniel was not known as one of these wise men at this point. He was just some guy who loved to eat vegetables at this point. But Daniel steps forward and he's like, hey, go tell the king that I can do it. I can interpret his dream. So Arioch, he could have just killed Daniel on the spot, because that was his mission. That was what he was told to do. Good soldiers just do what they're told to do. If there's a mission, you go complete your mission. So Arioch's mission was to go kill all these wise men. As soon as Daniel stepped forward, he could have went and done with Daniel. We're done. The end. Chapter 2, over. Boom. The book of Daniel is over. But that's not what happened. Daniel risked his life. He told Arioch. Arioch goes and he tells the king, I got this guy. Now, Daniel was taking a huge risk by going to Nebuchadnezzar, because we know that Daniel's faith gave him certain gifts, right? He had the gift of interpretation of dreams. We're going to see that because he was exactly right. But what if Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the interpretation? Kings in that day didn't have to have much of a reason to kill somebody. So even if Daniel did a great job, told him the dream, told him the interpretation, what if the interpretation was, God's going to kill you, Nebuchadnezzar? Well, Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't like that too much. And I have a feeling that Nebuchadnezzar would have taken that anger out on Daniel. But that's not what happened either. God had his hand on Daniel's life. Now, if you're taking notes, maybe you journal, maybe you take notes in your phone, maybe online, you're taking notes. Here's just sort of the first point. I want you to wrap your mind around this, and we're going to move from here. This is one thing I want you to know before you leave tonight. God uses our gifts. God uses your gifts to speak to unbelievers. God uses your gifts, God uses my gifts, God uses our gifts to speak to unbelievers. There's no reason to think that Nebuchadnezzar was any sort of believer in God, even though God was trying to speak to him through this dream. Nebuchadnezzar was not a believer in Yahweh, the God of Israel. In fact, if he had a God, it was himself. You'll see as we read, he is called the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's the one that calls himself the things that we call Jesus. That was Nebuchadnezzar. He was on a high horse, to say the least. So Nebuchadnezzar was there and believed himself to be sort of this godlike king. And Daniel was a nobody. Maybe you feel like that. Maybe you feel like a nobody. And anytime you approach anybody for Jesus, it seems like it's a mountain you can't climb. It's insurmountable because they're somebody and you're nobody. Maybe it feels like that. But Daniel was a nobody Jewish slave, but he had a gift, and that gift was interpretation of dreams. You never know if your gift is going to be utilized by God to lead somebody to Christ. All right, so let's move from that, that point. Here's a side note. Arioch, the commander of the warrior, like the soldier guy, all right, he takes all the credit. He takes all the credit for this. He's like, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, king, I found a guy that can interpret your dream. It's not like, hey, this guy came forward. Arioch had been searching to solve the king's problem, okay? And he had found it. So good job, Arioch, you found this guy. But sometimes people will use you and abuse you, but God will still get the glory. All right, we're going to find that out. So let's read. We did a lot of talking. Let's read. Starting with verse 27, we're going to read through 30 really quick. So if you're following along, Daniel 2, starting with verse 27. It says, Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king had asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions in your head as you lay there in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of the wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. You ever just been laying in bed and start thinking crazy stuff? Just wild, weird stuff as you kind of start to nod off. All right, that's sort of where Daniel calls Nebuchadnezzar out. He's like, all right, while you've been laying in bed thinking all this crazy stuff and you don't know what it means and you can't decipher it, God gave me the ability to tell you what it means. But it's not because I'm so wise, and it's not because I'm so good, all right? It's because he wants you to know something. So when we have gifts and we want to come at somebody to share the gospel with them, we can't come like, hey, look at how good God made me at this. Like our worship team, for instance, they can't come up here and be like, hey, look how good we are at singing and playing music, and just listen to our lyrics and how good they are. No. We go in humility and we say, we want to lead you to God using our way of communication. So that's what Daniel was doing. And listen, when we have questions, you start thinking of those crazy questions while you lay in bed at night. You lay in bed and you're thinking like existential questions like, what's the meaning of life? And all this stuff that you think of when you're laying in bed and things can start going weird and wonky in your head. Google can't answer all those questions for you, okay? Neither can astrologers, and neither can scientists or politicians. They don't have all the answers. Even though they might claim to have the answers, they might have a few answers, or they might be able to point to a few answers, but there is nobody with all the answers like our God has all the answers. So that's Daniel reminding Nebuchadnezzar, listen, there's only one person that reveals all the mysteries. And it's not all of your magician men. It's not all of your wise men or your enchanters or your anybody's. It's not all them. It's God. He's the revealer of all the truth. He's the omniscient one who holds everything in his hands. He made everything. He made everything. So he knows every answer before you even ask the question. So we get to this dream. Now, I'm not going to read all about the dream, but in your own time, you can read all the specifics. But in this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had been having, he had this statue in front of him. And the statue had this golden head, and like the chest area was made of silver. And as it got lower, it was bronze. And finally, it got to the feet, which were made of iron and clay. And you're like, iron and clay? That doesn't make sense. Why clay? Like, clay is brittle, clay breaks. All these metals are extremely hard, and like iron is super tough, and clay is like brittle. And they don't go together. Like, I don't know what kind of, you can't make pottery out of like, you can't put metal and clay like next to each other and they fuse. You can't do that. It's either got to be clay or it's got to be metal. Can't be really both, because they'll split apart. And that's what happens in the dream. The clay and the iron split apart, and they're on the feet. They're the base of the thing, and so the whole statue falls apart. And there's a rock that turns into a mountain, and it raises up. So that's the dream, and we're going to pick up in verse 44, where Daniel starts to interpret the dream. And I think that's where we can pull some good truth out of this thing for ourselves today. Verse 44 and 45. In the days of those kings, all right, this is every one of those precious metals, the gold, the silver, the bronze, and even the iron and clay. Those are different kingdoms that are going to rise up eventually. Nebuchadnezzar was the golden head of the statue, and all these different things were happening. All these kingdoms are going to raise up. You're going to see about these kingdoms. In the days of those kings, God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It will break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it will stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. If you're taking notes and you want to write down another kind of key point tonight, the interpretation, God rules all of history. God rules all of history. Because here's the deal. This wasn't going to be kingdoms that come up and like overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. He says this is going to happen after you're gone. Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to have a good reign. You're going to reign, and there's going to be a good life that you're going to live. But then there's going to be another kingdom that comes, and they're not going to be quite as good as you, but they're going to be good. And then there's going to be another one that's going to be good. And then there's going to be another one that's made of iron, and you're going to think that one cannot be broken. And a lot of people think that that's Rome, because Rome was so strong and Rome lasted so long. But what happens? That and the clay that it was hooked to breaks apart at the feet of this mountain that God establishes. Now you look in Isaiah and you look in other places throughout the Old Testament, this mountain has a name, and it's the Mount Zion. It's the mountain of God. And so God rules all of history. All of this, God's in control of. Nations rise and fall, leaders come and go. God's in control of it all. It's a little bit like my sandcastle story. Some of you may have heard this before, but when I was, long time ago, when I was a kid, me and a cousin were out at the beach and we're throwing a football together. And there's a family that had been, you know how you go to the beach, and when you stay for like a week, you're like, there's like another family that's staying for the same week, and you kind of park next to each other, and you see each other every morning. You go out, you do your tent thing, and they're doing their thing, and you're like, hey, good morning, we're seeing you again at the beach, hey. And it's just like, they're kind of your beach buddies or beach neighbors for the week. And so we had beach neighbors, and our beach neighbor, this particular beach trip, was building a sandcastle. And it wasn't just like, oh, that's sweet. They were like dumping over some sand and making a big mound. Like, if I build a sandcastle, it just looks like a bigger pile of sand than anywhere else like there. No, this was like one of those extreme makeover sandcastle edition guys. This was like one that built like an extremely intricate, detailed, like Disney castle of sand, okay? That's what we're talking about. And he had been working on this thing all week long. And we've been watching it. We've been watching it come up and up and up. And we're throwing the football. And we're like, hey. And my cousin, he throws one a little long. And I start to run, because I'm an incredible receiver. And I was going to catch up to it. And I was like, here we go. And all of a sudden, something that I didn't expect happened. Like I kind of run into some stuff, right? I'm like, hey, and I'm like getting stuck in sand. And I'm like, how am I getting stuck in sand? You know, there should be no sand at my waist. And and like, so I kind of stop and like, I kind of trip and catch my balance. Ball falls over there. And I look back and I look up and our beach buddy is standing there with his little utensils. And he's looking at me in shock. And I'm looking back at him, and I don't know what to think. I'm like, oh no. And this wave of terror, because I thought he was going to stab me with his little shovel, all right? I thought, like, this is the day my life ends in a pile of sand. And he's looking at me, and he's just like, and I'm like, first words I think of are, sorry, man, and I go get the ball, and I run. And in that moment, I thought, I will never forget this. And I haven't forgot it for 20 years. I haven't forgotten that. Because it reminds me all the time of this. That everything we build up, our own little castles, our own little kingdoms, to God, it's all made out of sand. And at any moment, something outside of our peripheral, something outside of our vision, something outside that we don't even know about can come through and wipe it out and leave us with nothing here on this earth. Something like a pandemic can come through. Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. Leaders come and leaders go. But God has established a kingdom that will never end, and it will encompass every other kingdom that there has ever been. It has no border, no need for a fence, no need for a wall, no need for anything. It has no borders because God owns it all. Everything falls in his kingdom. Historical chaos, right? Nations rising, nations falling, wars going on. The historical chaos turns into a beautiful, divinely orchestrated order as the greatest moment of history transforms or brings redemptive transformation to the world, the cross. And in the cross is where Jesus, the true King of Kings, because it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, even though throughout the book of Daniel they're calling Nebuchadnezzar King of Kings because that's what he wanted to call himself. Jesus, the true King of Kings, at the cross won the war against sin, the ruler of the earth, and he took it over and he planted his flag for his kingdom for this world at the cross of Christ. And he accepts everything, everyone. And unlike other kingdoms, because let me tell you, back in the day, if you were in a kingdom that got conquered, like take Babylon conquering Israel, when you were in that kind of situation, you were taken as a slave or worse. Okay? That's what other kingdoms did to conquered peoples. But what Jesus does when he planted his flag, when he took on the cross, when he won the battle against the rulers of this world, when he established his kingdom that will never end, he accepts you into it. And he doesn't just accept you as citizens of that kingdom. He makes you co-heirs to that kingdom, co-rulers of that kingdom. There is no kingdom in the history of kingdoms. There is no authority, there is no powers that be, there is nothing that makes everyone equal authority under their power. There's no place like that. But in God's kingdom, because you are made sons and you are made daughters in the name of Jesus, you are co-rulers to the kingdom of eternity. And so I want you to know that not only does God rule all of history, God will bless your boldness. So he'll use your gifts to reach unbelievers, and he rules all of history, so we know we're already covered by his kingdom, by his kingship. And here's the deal. He will bless your boldness. So if you're taking notes, this is kind of another point. He will bless your boldness. And here's how we're going to end. I just kind of want to read the end of this, because in verse 46, King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and an incense be offered up to him. And the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." And the king gave Daniel high honors and many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief prefect over all of the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made one request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court. God will bless your boldness. It was a bold move. It was a bold move for Daniel to go forward to the king to interpret his dream. A little Jewish slave that had been conquered, worthless to King Nebuchadnezzar, but became invaluable to King Nebuchadnezzar after he used his gift of interpretation and he was bold enough to take a stand for his faith. Daniel took a huge risk, and he ended up humbling a young king who, instead of referencing it, look how it flips at the end. Instead of referencing himself as King of Kings, he says, "Your God is the King of Kings. Your God is the Lord of Kings. He is over me." That's a young, high and mighty king praising the God of gods and King of Kings. And he says, your boldness may very well be the thing that brings somebody to Christ. You might be the one that your gifts, your passion, your boldness, your faith saves somebody else. Jude, verse 23, says it's like snatching someone from the fire when you approach one of your friends who might be an unbeliever, might be turned away from God, might be running from God. Jude says, snatch them from the fire using your gifts, using your passion for Jesus. You bring them back out of that, and you will save their life. It's not up to you to raise a platform for yourself. It's not even really up to you to build your own reputation. Or try to get more responsibility. I don't know if you're like around like the work situation where you're like, I feel like I could do more. I feel like I could do better than that guy. I feel like I need more responsibility, whatever it might be. It's not up to you to build that platform. It's not up to you to get more responsibility, but through humility and faithfulness. Here's what Daniel did, and here's what we can see right now. Through humility and faithfulness, seize every moment, seize every opportunity to share the gospel, seize every opportunity to use your God-given gifts for his glory. And when he is lifted high, he's going to bring you with him. When we lift up the name of Jesus, he brings us with him. But it's got to be about him, not about us. So it's in humility that we lift up the name of Jesus. When we make much of Jesus, he will make much of us. Let me pray for you. And the worship team's going to come back and they're going to lead us in some closing songs. But as you bow your heads and as you watch online, I don't know where you are in your faith, and I don't know if you feel like you could never be as bold as Daniel to go before a king with a faithful proclamation of who God is. But first of all, I want to ask you, who's God in your life? Who is the God of gods and the Lord of kings in your life? Because Nebuchadnezzar will mess that up again. You're going to see as our teaching team kind of teaches through Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar messes it up. Right here, he's declaring that Daniel's God is the God of gods. But in just a minute, he's going to build his own statue for himself and make people bow down to it. And I can't wait for you to hear that part next week. But my goodness, we flip it on its head so often. I want to know tonight if you are one of those people who you'll say it 1 minute, you'll declare it. Jesus is Lord 1 minute. Jesus is Lord of my life. I'm giving my life to Jesus today. But then tomorrow when you walk into school or you wake up, at 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. because, you just didn't have to wake up early and, you're going about your day and you're going to work and you're going to whatever you're going to do tomorrow. If it's still going to be Jesus is Lord of my life, or it's going to be you are Lord of your life. So tonight, make a commitment to him. I'm going to pray for us, and If you need to make a decision, if you're online and want to connect with us, go to our website, send us a message, or just say it right there in the comments. I need somebody to reach out to me. We will. I promise you, as soon as we can, we will connect with you. But if you're here in this place, find me, find one of our leaders. They're scattered around. Austin's here, Miss Beth's here, Miss Sheila's down there. If you need a leader to talk to about your faith journey, wherever you're at in life, you find us, we'll talk to you, we'll pray with you about your next step, whatever that looks like for you. Let me pray.